The 18th of February, 1943, Boeing Field, Seattle. A massive four-engine bomber, unlike anything the world has seen before, lifts off the runway on a routine test flight. At the controls is Edmund Allen, universally known as Eddie, one of the most respected test pilots in the entire American aviation industry. Less than an hour into the flight, one of the aircraft's four engines catches fire. Allen turns the bomber back toward the airfield. He does not make it back. The aircraft goes down in the middle of the city of Seattle, crashing into a meatpacking plant. Eddie Allen is killed instantly, along with his entire crew, and with several workers on the ground who never had any reason to expect an aircraft would fall out of the sky onto their workplace that afternoon. The aircraft that killed them was the B-29 Superfortress. Despite this catastrophe, it would not be canceled. It would be rushed into production with engines still catching fire, sent into combat across the vast Pacific, and within 30 months it would become the only bomber in history to drop a nuclear weapon in war. To understand how that happened, you have to understand the problem this aircraft was built to solve. The war planners in Washington looked at maps of the Pacific Ocean and saw a void. In Europe, the air war was relatively compact, where the B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator operated from friendly airfields in England, only a few hundred miles from their targets. The Pacific, however, was a theater of thousands of miles of open water. No nearby airfields existed, and there were no friendly staging areas close to the Japanese mainland. To strike the heart of Japan and return safely, a bomber had to cross vast, empty, oceanic distances that no existing American aircraft could survive. The military recognized this geographic barrier long before the United States entered the war. In January 1940, the Army Air Corps issued a formal specification for a super bomber. The requirements were staggering. An aircraft capable of carrying a massive bomb load across a combat radius of 2,500 miles, while flying at speeds of 400 miles per hour. This specification represented an entirely new strategic assumption about distance and basing, rather than a simple scaling up of existing designs. To meet these demands, Boeing engineers had to address the extreme physical toll of long-range flight on the aircrew. Flying a 15-hour mission at high altitude to avoid enemy defenses meant the crew would face sub-zero temperatures and lack of oxygen. To maintain crew endurance over these long distances without heavy flight suits or oxygen masks, a pressurized cabin became an operational necessity. Range, speed, altitude, payload, and human endurance became a single, linked engineering problem. In responding to this challenge, Boeing's designers began drafting what would become the most technologically ambitious bomber attempted by any nation. A traditional bomber fuselage was a hollow, unsealed metal shell. To hold sea-level air pressure at 30,000 feet, Boeing engineers redesigned the interior of the aircraft into a series of independent, AIR-tight cylinders. The nose section and the midship compartment had to withstand a continuous pressure differential of 6.5 pounds per square inch. This required heavy circular bulkheads and reinforced airtight seals that added significant structural weight. Because the bomb bays in the center of the aircraft had to remain open to the outside air during a mission, engineers split the crew spaces. They connected the forward cockpit to the aft compartment using a 35-foot-long pressurized crawl tunnel suspended directly over the bomb bays, forcing crew members to crawl on their bellies to move between stations. Keeping the crew inside these heated pressurized compartments meant they could no longer operate traditional hand-aimed gun turrets. Boeing resolved this by installing a centralized defensive network. 5 sighting stations used early General Electric analog computers to control 4 remote turrets, each armed with paired .50 caliber machine guns. Instead of freezing in exposed wind streams, gunners sat in comfortable cabins, tracking targets through optical sights, while the electromechanical computers calculated lead, range, and wind drift before electronically aligning the distant weapons. This interior architecture functioned alongside other interconnected systems. Tricycle landing gear, a major departure from older tailwheel designs, gave the heavy airframe stability on rudimentary runways. Inside, operators monitored early radar and advanced bombardment equipment, all drawing power from miles of internal wiring. The B-29 operated as a network of interdependent systems, where a single electrical failure could compromise cabin pressure and disable defensive armaments. To lift a 70,000-pound airframe and propel it across thousands of miles of open ocean, The Superfortress required an unprecedented level of propulsion. Boeing found this power in the Wright R3350 duplex Cyclone. This 18-cylinder, twin-row radial engine produced between 2,200 and 2,300 horsepower. With 4 of these massive power plants mounted on its wings, the bomber possessed the theoretical speed and range required for the Pacific theater. But the sheer density of the engine's design created a severe and immediate hazard. In order to minimize aerodynamic drag, engineers enclosed the massive radials within tightly tailored cowlings. This compact arrangement severely restricted the flow of cooling air around the cylinders. Inside the engine, 18 cylinders were crowded together in 2 dense rows. The rear row of cylinders, shielded from the direct blast of oncoming air, operated under extreme thermal stress. This cooling deficit was compounded by an uneven distribution of fuel from the carburetor, which left some cylinders running lean and exceptionally hot. During sustained high-power operations, such as heavy takeoffs or long climbs, temperatures in the rear cylinders frequently spiked to dangerous levels. Under these conditions, the internal components of the R3350 were vulnerable to sudden and catastrophic failure. Fuel leaks, backfires through the induction system, and fractured oil lines could instantly ignite intense in-flight fires. This inherent design hazard soon exacted a devastating human toll. During early testing in Seattle, a severe engine fire broke out on the second prototype, leading to a crash that killed Boeing's chief test pilot, Eddie Allen, along with his entire flight crew and dozens of people on the ground. The loss of Allen, one of the nation's most experienced and respected test pilots, shook the entire program. Though some adjustments were made to the cowling baffles and fuel lines, the core vulnerabilities of the duplex Cyclone remained unresolved. As the United States military prepared to transition the bomber from experimental flight testing to mass combat production, they inherited an aircraft of unmatched strategic potential, powered by an engine that remained fundamentally unreliable and hazardous to its own crews. Army and civil investigators immediately dissected the Seattle wreckage to understand why the prototype had suffered such a catastrophic structural failure. They traced the disaster directly to the Wright R3350's magnesium alloy components, which ignited when exposed to leaking fuel. Magnesium burns at over 5,000 degrees, easily melting through heavy aluminum wing spars within seconds, while resisting conventional firefighting foam. Yet, with billions of dollars already committed and the strategic demands of the Pacific War growing more urgent by the day, military procurement authorities refused to cancel the program or wait for a ground-up engine redesign. Instead, they forced a wartime compromise. Engineers implemented a series of partial fixes to reduce immediate risk, including thicker steel firewalls, redesigned cooling baffles, rerouted fuel lines, improved oil circulation, and upgraded fire suppression. These modifications did not solve the fundamental thermal hazards of the duplex Cyclone, but they allowed the military to proceed with mass production. The B-29 would go to war with its design flaws unresolved, carrying an engine that remained a constant burning threat to its own crews. To safeguard production against a single point of catastrophic failure, the military transformed B-29 procurement into a sprawling, dispersed manufacturing system. Final assembly expanded far outside of Seattle. Boeing operated massive production lines in Wichita, Kansas, and Renton, Washington, while Bell Aircraft assembled the bombers in Marietta, Georgia, and Glenn L. Martin built them in Omaha, Nebraska. Supported by thousands of local subcontractors and a massive civilian workforce, this industrial network ultimately produced approximately 3,970 of these complex aircraft. Scaling up production did not cure the bomber's underlying mechanical dangers. As newly formed crews trained across the United States, in-flight engine failures and fatal training accidents remained a constant threat. While manufacturing standards slowly matured and reliability marginally improved, engineers never fully resolved the inherent thermal hazards of the Wright R3350 engine. The military accepted the compromise, sending young crews into combat aboard an advanced strategic weapon that still carried a lethal, unresolved power plant risk. Subscribe for more carefully researched history. In June 1944, the military launched the first B-29 combat operations under Operation Matterhorn. Because Allied forces lacked bases close to the Japanese mainland, planners staged the bombers at forward airfields near Chengdu, China. This temporary arrangement created an extraordinary logistical obstacle. Every gallon of aviation fuel, every bomb, and every spare part had to be flown over the Himalayas from bases in India. Air crews and transport pilots called this treacherous mountain crossing the hump. The logistical strain of this route was severe. A single B-29 consumed approximately 7,000 gallons of fuel during a round-trip combat mission. To secure enough fuel and bombs to launch a single raid of just 25 bombers, cargo planes had to complete roughly 203 hazardous flights over the mountains. The supply network was largely self-consuming, with transport aircraft burning through vast quantities of fuel simply to deliver a fraction of their cargo over the high peaks. To ease the bottleneck, engineers stripped some B-29s of their defensive weapons and converted them into fuel tankers. Crews flew these highly volatile aircraft through unpredictable weather, battling severe icing, mountain turbulence, and the constant threat of engine failure. Over the course of the campaign, the 20th Bomber Command managed to fly 49 combat missions, totaling approximately 3,058 sorties. By conventional standards, the operation was highly inefficient and costly in both machinery and human lives. Yet the military maintained the effort due to the strategic urgency of striking the Japanese home islands. Ultimately, the supply-starved campaign in China demonstrated that while the B-29 could reach its targets, executing a sustained and effective strategic bombing campaign would require a much more practical, sea-accessible base. In the second half of 1944, American forces captured Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, transforming the geography of the air war. Naval construction battalions landed immediately behind the assault troops, building massive airfields, while Japanese soldiers still held pockets of the surrounding terrain. On Tinian, Seabees worked day and night, crushing local coral to pave runways capable of handling the 60-ton aircraft. Tinian North Field grew to become one of the largest air bases in the world, featuring 4 parallel runways and vast hard stands to park hundreds of bombers. This island network replaced the mountain supply routes of the China campaign. While that earlier effort relied on transports over the Himalayas, the Marianas allowed Liberty ships to unload gasoline and heavy munitions directly into deepwater ports, keeping the B-29s continuously supplied. By late 1944, the bombers began flying round-trip missions directly to the Japanese mainland. However, these early high-altitude daylight precision raids produced disappointing results. Flying at 25,000 to 30,000 feet, air crews encountered a powerful, unexpected atmospheric force. These high-altitude winds, later identified as the jet stream, often exceeded 100 to 200 miles per hour. The roaring air current pushed the bombers at ground speeds the Norden bomb sight was never programmed to calculate, scattering the bombs miles away from their industrial targets. This atmospheric anomaly defied the entire doctrine of American strategic bombardment, which was built on the assumption of clear, stable skies and predictable ballistics. The secure Pacific bases had solved the logistical crisis, but they had also exposed a frustrating tactical barrier. In early 1945, General Curtis LeMay abandoned the high-altitude daylight precision bombing doctrine that had defined the B-29's development. Faced with persistent cloud cover and the disruptive forces of the Pacific jet stream, LeMay ordered a new approach. He decided to send the bombers in at night, flying at approximately 8,000 feet, far below the turbulent winds that scattered their payloads. To carry the heaviest possible bomb load, crews stripped the aircraft of nearly all defensive guns, ammunition, and fire control computers, leaving only the tail weapons. This weight reduction allowed the bombers to carry massive loads of incendiary canisters, specifically designed to ignite the densely packed, wooden urban construction of Japanese cities. Flying at low altitude at night reduced the bombers' exposure to enemy fighter defenses, which lacked effective night fighting radar systems. This decision altered the flight altitude, the payload, the timing of the missions, and the overall defensive philosophy of the campaign. Ultimately, it changed the definition of success. Pinpoint accuracy was discarded, replaced by a devastating new measure of effectiveness: the wholesale area destruction of urban centers. On the night of March 9, 1945, the new tactical doctrine materialized over the Japanese capital. A force of 327 B-29 Superfortresses flew toward Tokyo, arriving in the early hours of March 10th. They flew at altitudes between 5,000 and 9,000 feet, low enough to bypass the high winds of the jet stream. They did not carry nuclear weapons. Their bays were packed with conventional incendiary munitions, primarily M69 gelled gasoline bombs designed to scatter burning fuel upon impact. The primary target was a densely populated residential and industrial sector measuring roughly 12 square miles. Tokyo's urban layout made it highly vulnerable, with hundreds of thousands of homes built of wood, bamboo, and paper. When the first Pathfinder aircraft dropped their payloads, they marked a giant cross of fire in the dark. The bombers that followed released thousands of tons of incendiaries directly into the flames. The resulting fires quickly merged, creating a massive firestorm. The rising column of superheated air drew surrounding winds inward with force, fueling temperatures that reached 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. On the ground, the environment became unlivable within minutes. The wind blew fire along the streets like water. Emergency crews were instantly overwhelmed, their equipment destroyed, and their water supplies depleted. Escape was nearly impossible. Aspiring survivors ran toward the canals, only for many to drown or succumb to the heat of the boiling water. The firestorm consumed the oxygen in open spaces, suffocating thousands who sought refuge in parks and shelters. When the last bombers departed, approximately 16 square miles of Tokyo had been completely incinerated. An estimated 100,000 people died in a single night. More than 1 million survivors were left homeless. By almost any measure, the March 10th raid remains the most destructive airstrike in human history, claiming more lives than the conventional bombings of Dresden or Hamburg, and causing more immediate deaths than either of the later atomic attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This operation was not an isolated event. Throughout the spring and summer of 1945, the military directed similar low-level incendiary raids against dozens of other Japanese cities, including Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, and Yokohama. The campaign revealed a profound conflict in the aircraft's original design. A bomber built to cross the Pacific and force an end to the war had instead become the platform for the deadliest conventional air assault in human history. On August 6, 1945, a specially modified B-29 named the Enola Gay took off from the island of Tinian. It carried a single weapon code named Little Boy. This was the first atomic bomb used in warfare. The target was Hiroshima, the first city to experience an atomic attack. To carry this 5-ton payload, the aircraft had undergone extensive modifications under a secret program code named Silver Plate. Workers removed almost all defensive gun turrets and heavy armor plating to reduce weight. They installed stronger pneumatic bomb bay doors, reinforced the internal fuselage structures, and fitted advanced propellers. These changes improved the aircraft's speed and handling at high altitudes, which was vital for the crew to escape the impending blast. At 8:15 a.m., the weapon dropped over the city. The immediate effects of the detonation were devastating. Tens of thousands of people died instantly. The explosion produced an intense blast wave, blinding thermal heat and rapid firestorms, each causing distinct patterns of injury and death. Thousands of survivors suffered deep burns, while others succumbed to the physical force of collapsing buildings. In the weeks and months that followed, ionizing radiation introduced a delayed, silent form of mortality. Total death estimates range from tens of thousands killed immediately to well over 100,000 when these later radiation deaths are included. The crew members functioned as operators in an unprecedented mission, turning their lightened bomber back toward the Pacific while a giant column of dust and smoke rose over the ruined city. 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, a second modified bomber, Boxcar, carried the plutonium weapon code named Fat Man toward Japan. Heavy cloud cover over the primary target of Kokura forced the crew to divert to their secondary destination, Nagasaki. The detonation killed tens of thousands of people instantly, and subsequent radiation exposure increased the death toll over the following months. Japan surrendered within days of the attack. More than 80 years later, the B-29 holds a singular position in history as the only aircraft type ever to drop nuclear weapons in combat. Though modern militaries subsequently constructed far more advanced and destructive strategic systems, and none of those later delivery platforms have ever been used against an adversary. This historical record stands apart from metrics of mission totals or conventional bomb tonnage. Instead, the legacy of the Superfortress remains defined by its unmatched consequence. An aircraft built to resolve an otherwise unwinnable war ultimately served as the platform for both the deadliest single conventional raid and the only nuclear attacks in history. Subscribe for more historical documentaries.
The question of whether the atomic bombings were necessary to end the war remains one of the most complex debates in modern history. By the summer of 1945, Japanese officials were exploring diplomatic channels to end the conflict, hoping to use the neutral Soviet Union to broker a peace agreement. However, these diplomatic efforts did not mean Japan's military leaders were prepared to accept UN conditional surrender. Key commanders remained committed to a final defense of the home islands, hoping to inflict massive casualties during an Allied invasion to force better terms. The division within the government was deep. Even after the atomic attacks, a group of military officers attempted a coup to prevent the emperor from broadcasting the surrender. This strategic situation changed when the Soviet Union declared war on August 8th, launching a sudden offensive into Manchuria. This invasion destroyed Tokyo's hopes of Soviet mediation and raised the immediate threat of a Red Army occupation of the Japanese home islands. The B-29, built to resolve a distant conflict, had already become the single weapon system responsible for the deadliest conventional air assault and the only nuclear strikes in history. Scholars interpret these events through different lenses. One argument states that the sheer shock of the atomic bombs was the decisive factor that broke the political deadlock in Tokyo. Another interpretation emphasizes the Soviet entry into the war, arguing that the collapse of the Manchurian front and the loss of diplomatic hope had a greater effect on the military leadership than the destruction of cities. A broader perspective combines these forces, suggesting that surrender was forced by the cumulative pressure of the atomic attacks, the Soviet invasion, the naval blockade, and the exhaustion of Japan's resources. Historians have also examined alternatives to the atomic bombs, including a direct amphibious invasion, a continued naval blockade, a demonstration of the weapon on an uninhabited area, or a modification of the unconditional surrender terms. Each argument is supported by wartime documents, diplomatic records, and diaries from all sides. 8 decades later, these questions remain unresolved. This ongoing division among historians does not alter the human cost of the attacks. Ultimately, the bomber developed to prevent a bloody invasion remains historically unique, the only aircraft to deliver both the most destructive conventional raid and the only nuclear strikes in human warfare. Subscribe for more historical documentaries. The formal surrender in Tokyo Bay did not end the operational life of the Superfortress. In 1946, the United States established the Strategic Air Command, positioning the B-29 as the backbone of its early Cold War nuclear deterrent. For several years, this piston-engine bomber remained the only aircraft in the world capable of delivering atomic weapons. When conflict erupted on the Korean Peninsula in June 1950, the B-29 returned to active combat. Over the next 3 years, these bombers flew thousands of sorties, conducting high-altitude bombing, night interdiction, reconnaissance, and close support missions. But the skies over Korea had changed. In October 1950, daylight encounters with early Soviet-built MiG-15 jet fighters exposed the aging bomber's vulnerability. Flying at speeds and altitudes the B-29's analog defensive systems could not match. The jet fighters inflicted heavy losses, forcing the United States military to restrict the Superfortress to night operations. The technological lessons of the B-29, its pressurized crew cabins, long-range aerodynamics, and integrated strategic systems passed directly into its successors, including the B-50 and the jet-powered B-52 Stratofortress. By the mid-1950s, rapid advancements in jet propulsion rendered the piston-driven bomber obsolete, and the military retired the Superfortress from frontline service. We measure the B-29's place in history by its unmatched consequences, rather than conventional milestones, sortie records, or total bomb tonnage. The aircraft stands alone as a machine designed to resolve a global crisis that ultimately delivered the most destructive conventional raid and the only nuclear weapons ever used against an enemy. The legacy that began with Eddie Allen's fatal test flight in a burning prototype ended with an aircraft carrying the enormous weight of modern history. Subscribe for more historical documentaries. Today, the skies over Hiroshima and Tokyo are quiet, but the shadow of the Superfortress still looms over modern warfare. We live in an era shaped by the very deterrence this aircraft inaugurated, where the boundary between conventional conflict and total annihilation remains razor thin. The B-29 represents the moment human ingenuity permanently outpaced our moral certainty. Ultimately, the burning prototype that claimed Eddie Allen's life paved the way for a machine carrying the heaviest weight of human history.